This video is for people at the factory who are going to be working on the 1233, which we call the switch Blitz. Just a quick note in case you don't know, this is just like the HPC Blitz when it comes to making an original key. And when working on this machine and calibrating or figuring out problems, it's better to first calibrate and make sure that the code part works, not the duplication part. And so this is very similar in the switch Blitz in that we have a shoulder gauge here with a rod running through this point. And there's a little screw here for a hex key or Allen wrench that you can turn this rod and it'll allow this to move right and left for calibrating the spacing. Now, of course, you're going to use the calibration kit with the card, the special blade, and it comes with a special key when you do that. In order to move this right and left, unlike the switch Blitz, there's actually a little screw point on the side over here that you can turn and it'll move right to left. So that's your spacing. That shouldn't be very difficult. And then when it comes to your depth, you're going to be adjusting this rod here. Now this is not round as it appears. It has a little bit of a oval shape to it. So as you turn this, it'll actually move this further or closer away very minutely, but it's enough to make a difference when calibrating. And for that, you have a screw right here that's also an Allen wrench that you would loosen up in order to make that happen. And that rod runs all the way across to here, and you can see we have a screw point here where a flathead screwdriver will go in to allow that also. Being that these have places for a flathead screwdriver, it makes it a lot easier than on the standard one, which doesn't have that. It's usually a pliers, but you do see there's a notch. It's very hard to see black on black, but there is a notch along here that you can use the tool. Let's see if I can get one in there. See how that fits in, and I can move that and adjust it that way. It's just easier on this because you've got that point. Just going back a little bit, there's an Allen wrench right here to loosen that top bar, and there's also one right here. Okay, so calibrating this machine for code cutting is very similar to the 1200 Blitz between the spacing and the depth. It shouldn't be really a problem or an issue. Just make sure that you're using the calibration kit with the yellow card, the calibration cutter, it's actually a wheel, not a cutter, and the special key. Now when you're going to calibrate the code section of it, if you read the manual, and I'll include a link for that, it's best to use a tip stop key. So you're going to go ahead and use a tip stop like this here, and it's going to go into this position once again just like the Blitz, and you're going to cut. I'm going to recommend the best key because that's what the factory's been doing. So you're going to calibrate it using this in place, slide a best key in, you'll see a little notch in the bottom of the best key, and that way you know it's aligned. Okay, and actually there's a notch in the calibration key also that'll match up with the best key. In my experience, it's not necessarily a problem with the machines when people call, it's a problem with the locksmith. So the first problem that I see most people have is not using the right cutter. So we want to use, when duplicating a key, the CW6010. Now the reason I say that's the problem is because most, if not all, the other machines only use one cutter. It's unique to have different cutters for different types of locks and keys. But the HPC Blitz and switch Blitz uses different cutters for different things. So the first question I always ask is, what cutter are you using? And make sure it matches up with their lock. The second question I ask is, what jaw are they using? So underneath here, I don't know if you see, there's a little A right there. It's hard to see. So I make sure they're using the A jaw. Turn it over and there's a B jaw. And B jaw is known for best and a few others, but it's really an exception that you have to use a B jaw. And then there's a C jaw for the older Medico. So when troubleshooting, first step is not to do anything to the machine, but to deal with the customer and make sure they're using the right card, the right cutter, the right jaw, and they're properly tip stopping it. Here's another issue that also happens with this machine that customers complain about and don't realize it's them or their lack of knowledge. So right here is a plug that a wire runs into this little sensor so that if this is down, the machine will start. If it's up, it will not. And that's to prevent you from actually cutting this. But there's shavings that get inside of here and hinder the switch. And when that happens, you'll get just a brief motion by the cutter. It'll look kind of like this. Just a quick back and forth, and that's it. And they'll complain the cutter turns briefly and then the machine does nothing. That means that this switch is either defective or more likely it's covered with shavings. So you just take a can of air, spray it in there real well, maybe lift up the machine, make sure that all the shavings are out, and you'll be good. Okay, so now we're setting it up to check the calibration or to actually calibrate it. So we've got our calibration card here with instructions on the top. We've got our cutter or our wheel, and it does say this side out, so the printing is going to be facing us. Then we have the key, the calibration key, and you'll notice there's a notch in the bottom of it and a notch in the center of it. And that guide is going to go right into that little notch. Now, as it says in the manual, when you're doing some of this work, you might want to put a white piece of paper underneath. It just helps you see better with all these black parts. Okay. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set up the machine as if we were cutting by code. And if we do it correctly, you'll see the space mark is going to be right in the middle. And we turn it. And now you'll see both are right, getting reflection, right up there. So that means it's calibrated, this machine. And as you can see over here, we did it by the tip stop first. Okay. And now we're going to show in here, see that? Yeah, there we go. So the cutter should be moving right into that little slot. And if that's in the slot and we go back over here, everything is straight up and down. Okay. Now, if something wasn't right and one of the needles were to the right or left, then that's when we'd be adjusting this shoulder gauge like I talked about earlier, or we'd be turning this bar. We're going to move this back. We would be turning this so that it is correctly aligned. Later in the video, I'll actually have a calibration kit and show you step by step what to do. But after this is all calibrated, then we're going to calibrate this side. So we cut a key, we make sure that it works in the lock. Now we're going to duplicate a key. So when duplicating or adjusting it, what we're going to do is we're going to put a key in each jaw, duplicate it, and then I'm going to take a micrometer and measure the cuts in each of the keys and see how far off they are. If I see that they're a thousandths of an inch, I'm good. But if it's, let's say, 5 to 10 thousandths of an inch, then at that point we have to adjust it. Here we have a wheel that is going to adjust the depth. So very small turns. I mean, maybe if from here to here is a quarter of a turn, you only want to go about maybe an eighth of a turn each time and check the key. Okay. To turn that, it's very easy. And then to adjust the spacing, which is going to be the right and left, we're going to lift up the machine. And there's some screws here that actually go into that bar. And that's going to allow you to go ahead and move it right and left. That's what's holding it in place. So that's going to be your spacing. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to space from the tip of the key on each side. Make sure it's maybe flush with the jaw is the easiest way that we've done it. Okay. And then make sure they line up and then slide it over appropriately. And once they're lined up, tighten up the screws. I'm going to be a little surprised if you have to adjust the spacing. That's not usually something that's a problem. It's usually the depth, not the spacing. All right. The other thing is always to check the depth first, cut the key, and see if the key works in the lock. After you put the key in the lock, see if it's tough to turn or not. Okay? And then go back and adjust. I've already done the duplication part, so. All right, so we've established this machine is calibrated for the code cutting side. Now we're just going to review a little bit on the duplication side. So again, this is used for the depth, and by turning this wheel, that's going to move this forward and back. And then underneath the screws here are for moving this back and forth on the bar. Now, there's actually 4 here. I might have said 2 in the last one, but there's 4 different ones. As I said earlier, you're probably not going to have to adjust the spacing. That's more unusual. And that's going to be for larger adjustments when you're doing those bottom ones. If you just need a minor adjustment, you can actually adjust the screw right here, just a little bit in or out. That's the shoulder gauge. So if you need to move just a little, just adjust it here. Remember, always try to adjust the code part first, and then work on this. Also online or at the factory, you should have this book on the switch Blitz, and there's a section on calibration, and it's, you know, from page 81 to page 121, so that's about 40 pages. So between the video and the book, if you're having any problems other than that, feel free to give me a call or contact me. Thank you.